Most people love a good war hero story. They're exhilarating, and maybe even entertaining. I also think that most people also wonder what kind of person actually makes a good war hero story. Or what would I have done if I were in their shoes? These stories also give us a chance to think about awesome virtues like selflessness, integrity, and courage. But those aren't cheap thoughts. Those virtues often come with a very high price tag. I'd like to introduce you to John C. Waldron. He was born in the hard prairie near Fort Pierce, South Dakota, part Native American, Lakota. And in combat aviator terms, he was an old man at age 41 with a career and a wife and kids. And on June 4th, 1942, he and those that followed him changed the course of history.
You must remember that Lakota people were cavalry first. They went to war or battle on horses, so they qualify as cavalry. As the battle ensued, the people could see each other and see how they react. And you don't want to do something cowardly, because when you get home, that truth will come out and it will affect the family. So they have a saying, Okichizel Michatelo, which means people get killed in war. Nichin Shneo, which means don't try and live. Oganas Ishtenichin, you might disgrace yourself. When you apply it to people going to war, you're generous with your life to give to the survival of your family and your tribe. You're giving your life away. And that's true generosity.
He was generous with his life. John Waldron had the Lakota virtue of generosity. But he also was in charge of the other men that were with him.
And that's that leadership thing, that you never want to exhibit fear. Even if you're scared, you don't want to, because you jeopardize the lives of the entire company. And I think that's what he did, was he took that risk.
The record is, he says that essentially his Native American blood told him where the fleet was. And he broke off from the main Navy group.
Well, that I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be his Norwegian blood or whatever it is too, you know.
Sure. So I think about this, I'm trying to understand how I process what makes a man lead a whole formation into battle that they might, I mean, if you look at the nuts and bolts of what happened, they had a really good chance of dying. I mean, this wasn't a battle that they had a whole lot of thought of coming home. They couldn't have, because they understood what they were going into.
The issue of danger is not considered. The issue of defeating the enemy, when you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, is what we're looking for. So the danger, we didn't think about, I might die. we think about, if I die, I hope the outcome is good. It's something we're dying for.
Midway is significant for a number of reasons, the first of which is that if you look at the course of the Pacific War in the previous 6 months, from Pearl Harbor on, December 7th, uninterrupted Japanese victories. The Japanese war machine, both the Army and the Navy, were unbeatable. When you compare their economy and their growth potential with the United States, let alone with the United States, Britain, to a certain extent, France, that was only going to end one way. But it didn't look that way early on, because up until the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, exactly 4 weeks before Midway, the Japanese had no reverses at all. True, they had a temporary reversal at Wake Island, but after their first landing attempt failed, they came back a couple days later and took the island. So Coral Sea really sets the stage for Midway. The Japanese recognized that as long as America's carriers remained intact, the war could proceed beyond Admiral Yamamoto's prediction of 6 months. He did not say, we have awakened a sleeping giant, but he did say, I can run wild for the first 6 months, after which I can guarantee nothing. And he nailed it practically to the day and the hour, because the main significance of Midway is that it chopped off Japan's unbroken string of victories. Up to June 4th, 1942, Japan was always on the offensive. After that, Japan was almost totally on the defensive.
What if the Japanese would have won at Midway? And I think it's a foregone conclusion that the United States won the Pacific War. I mean, everybody.
Correct.
But what would have happened if they would have won the Battle of Midway?
I have to believe that even had the Japanese won at Midway, we still would have gone on the offensive, probably summer, fall of 1943. And that means that we still drop anchor in Tokyo Bay, probably in 1946, certainly in 1947.
47, but you think it was a brutal war, casualty after casualty. I mean, this.
Yeah, that's another year and a half of casualties.
Culture seems to be an underlying force of so many strategic decisions, be it business or military. We've got John Waldron's Native American culture, which meant everything to him. But Jay, you were explaining the Japanese culture. What is Navy culture like in 1942?
There was a distinct hierarchy among Annapolis graduates and everybody else. Waldron came from that Annapolis culture. So did every other squadron commander and senior officer on his carrier, the Hornet. The real fly in the ointment was the Air Group Commander Stanhope Cotton Ring, who was 2 years younger than John Waldron, commanding Torpedo Squadron 8, but he was 1 year senior at Annapolis. And to understand more about the Navy culture, when Mark Mitzer was selected to place Hornet in commission on the East Coast in October 1941, he was allowed to select some of his senior officers, and he chose Stanhope Ring and the eventual fighter squadron commander, Pat Mitchell, because they had been cronies of his at the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington.
Sure.
Neither of them were remotely qualified to lead a 1942 air group into combat. But on the other hand, John Waldron was highly experienced in carrier aviation. He had 3 previous squadron tours in carrier aircraft. First, as a torpedo pilot, secondly, as a scout pilot, and thirdly, as a fighter pilot. If you look at the career paths of the other senior aviators aboard the Hornet, Waldron was by far the most experienced in carrier operations. And he was also the senior squadron commander. He was 2 to 3 years ahead of the other 3, and by rights he should have been air group commander at Midway.
But why wasn't he? I mean, just the cronyism.
The cronyism, because Mitchell wanted Stanhope Ring, who was a full commander,
Sure.
to lead the air group, and Bureau of Personnel went along with that.
They're getting ready to plan. Stanhope Ring, probably not the best person to be leading the air group, but John Waldron contests him and says, no, your plan is wrong. You know, and then of course John Waldron then breaks away.
Now,
is there any precedent in Navy culture for a squadron commander to essentially
He mutinied.
He mutinied.
The Hornet Air Group launched all 4 squadrons, or elements of all 4 squadrons. They were headed true course 265, almost due west. Despite knowing where the partial sightings were off Midway, Hornet Air Group decided to fly almost due west instead of southwest. Waldron is looking at his plotting board, and apparently George Gay, who was the one survivor from the TBDs, saw the skipper do this. There was a radio argument between Ring and Waldron, which in itself was a no-no because
they're
breaking radio silence. So finally, Waldron, his personal call sign, he said, "This is Johnny 1. We're going where the carriers are," words to that effect. And he made that dramatic 90-degree left turn off the air group's base course and took them slam bang right into Kido Butai. Waldron had the complete confidence of his troops, and I have never seen or heard any indication that anyone hesitated in following him.
They followed him.
Yeah.
He followed their leader.
In 1937, this is the slickest machine you'll find on a carrier deck. 1942, it's already on its way out because the more capable Grumman Avenger is on the way. Although George Gay and others like to describe the Devastator as a suicide coffin, in truth, it was a pretty capable machine. It had the ability to deliver torpedoes or bombs. It had a Norden bomb sight here in the middle cockpit where a dedicated bombardier could use that to drop bombs from high altitude. So basically it was a triple threat aircraft.
Sure.
The trouble is it was slow, and it was limited tactically by the limitations of the torpedo. Whatever advantage Torpedo 8 had in a high-speed descent from altitude was soon dissipated because they got down within 60 to 100 feet of the water in order to deliver their torpedoes, which tended to broach or porpoise if they were dropped from much higher than that. The TBDs, the rear seat is occupied by a radioman gunner who had either 1 or 2 30 caliber machine guns. The classic way to attack an airplane with a rear gunner is 6 o'clock low, because in this case, from the Zero's perspective, the gunner can't see him because his own tail blocks it out. So by staying low, the torpedo planes deprived the fighters of that approach, but it didn't matter much because the Zeros were approximately 200 miles per hour faster. They had the altitude advantage, they had cannon and machine gun armament, and that fight was only going to go one way. And that was no surprise to Waldron or anyone else, because he had told his pilots before they launched, if there's only one man left, I want him to go in and get a hit. And of course George Gay was the one man left, but he had no opportunity to get a hit, even though he claimed one.
Why do you think he went along? I mean, he, instead of complaining about the direction, why didn't he say, look, my guys aren't going, we're going to die?
Well, he could have had it both ways. He could have stayed with the air group commander, Stanhope Ring, to the limit of his radius, and then called up, or not, just said, we have a 10% fuel reserve, we're going back. We're not going to ditch like the fighter squadron did.
Right.
So Waldron had that option, and that would have been an honorable course of action for him. But the John Waldron, the Sioux warrior, I don't think he ever considered it. I think he said, there's the enemy, I know where he is, I'm going to strike him if I can.
This one here will probably be more as I come down and make this mark and pass like here. He's not a factor.
He's not a factor, but going belly up to me.
Yeah.
If
Well,
Davey.
what'll happen is I'll come in from out here, come high,
Okay.
and I'll pass underneath you.
Is he coming underneath the camera ship on this pass?
I'd like that to be co-out, so if you can just kind of go right behind him.
Oh, that'd
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay. And then the
And
last
those are the
one,
same ones.
2 passes, one
Yep.
left, one right. Call you.
Okay. All right, let's go. They send young men to war because they don't know any differently. You've got to be much braver the older you get because you most likely have family, friends. You have experiences that go beyond a perspective of a 21-year-old. If you're 40 years old going into combat, you know the results. You understand the consequences of that combat situation. At 41, he had to have known that his probability of survival was low, and it was not only goodbye to his crewmates, but it was probably goodbye to family 5,000 miles away.
You don't want to do something cowardly because when you get home, that truth will come out. And you never want to bring shame on your family. So the one rule is don't try and live.
When I was in the back of that Helldiver watching that Zero come in, I was impressed by how much work it must have been for those tail gunners in Waldron's torpedo planes. Getting the guns up, aiming, and then tracking the airplane. If you were going to do your job, there wasn't time to be afraid. And then I remembered Francis Whitebird's statement that a warrior doesn't try to live. And it all made sense. If I had my mind on anything other than my job, my responsibility, and the bigger mission, I'd have come unglued and wouldn't have been able to do it. And that's when I saw the practical, unglamorous beginnings of heroic deeds. Training, focus, and a sense of responsibility that goes way beyond ego. And in that way, the deeds of a person, a warrior, a hero, become a legend. And when you become a legend, you live forever.